Hi everybody, this is Queeries. My name is Logan. I use she, her pronouns.
Oh, hi y'all. My name's Bambi. I use she, her pronouns.
Hi everyone, my name is Shanae and I also use she, her pronouns.
So this is our first episode this semester, and we're just going to talk a little bit about LGBT history. I do want to say that, just kind of as a disclaimer, Queeries doesn't represent the Resource Center. We're just three people sitting around talking about fun stuff. So yeah.
We're gonna have fun today, though.
Some interesting things lined up. Interesting facts.
Okay, well, like I said earlier, my name's Bambi. As of right now, I'm an animation student at UGA. I'm in my third year. I know for me, when it comes to LGBT history, I never knew much about it. So this episode really helped me dive in and do some research on some of the people that I knew were LGBT icons in the past but didn't know much about. For example, now I don't know if I'm saying her name right, but it's Audre Lorde. I really like her just because of one quote. It's when I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid. This can easily be seen as an inspiration, as she was a pioneer for the LGBTQ and women's rights during the 1960s and 70s, especially for the Black community. Being a self-proclaimed Black lesbian mother poet, Audre Lorde spent most of her life in activism. I really feel like that's important.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of people don't know a lot of LGBT history. I know the university might have one class that talks about LGBT history, but I'm not sure.
I know, actually I'm not sure about that, but there is a feminist philosophy class, and we did land on that topic quite a few times, so.
Yeah, it's like it relies on other classes to bring up
pieces,
history,
right? Yeah.
Because I took queer theater and film last semester, and that had a ton of LGBT history because it was so relevant to all of the films and theater that we watched and read. So it's kind of unfortunate. I know there's a human sexualities class, and that might include some.
Is that under
history.
women's studies?
It's psychology.
That's interesting. It's interesting that you bring that up because I was actually listening to another podcast. I forgot what university it was, but they were talking about having their first class actually about sexuality and LGBT history and all that. And it was pretty cool. I wish I could remember the name of it right now, but basically they were talking about the history and why it's important to have these be known. Basically so that we don't repeat a horrible past, maybe something like what happened with Stonewall, those riots and just the discrimination that LGBT people have faced throughout history. It's important to learn about that.
Oh yeah, it's actually a lot of people, they know about Stonewall riots and they don't know about anything before that, and maybe not as much after, but let's talk about Stonewall for a minute just in case people don't know what it is.
Because I know for myself I didn't know much about it until I started looking up Marsha Johnson, but
Stonewall, I think, was a bar in Greenwich Village, I'm pretty sure, Stonewall Inn. So back in the 60s and probably earlier and probably still afterwards, police had this terrible habit of raiding bars and places where queer people would frequent. And there was this law, I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering this all correctly, there was this law that people had to be wearing at least 2 articles of clothing that was appropriate, quote unquote, for their assigned gender.
Wow.
So assigned gender at birth.
I did not
know that. If you were assigned male at birth, you had to be wearing 2 articles of clothing at least that were traditionally worn by men. So a way that a lot of queer and trans people would kind of circumvent that would be they would take like socks and ball them up and use them as breasts. And there was something else. They would have like watches, maybe. Yeah. And there were like some other things that they would do to kind of get around that, which didn't always protect them. But So then on June 28th, 1969, at Stonewall, the police decided to do this again, and the patrons were sick of it. So they decided to fight back.
I can imagine why.
Yeah. And do you want to talk about Marsha P. Johnson? Because wasn't she the one who started it?
I actually do. It was the first shot heard around the world that signified the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. For Marsha, it was the first brick thrown that signified the beginning of the Stonewall riots in a war for equality for all. It's a popular myth that Johnson threw the first brick that shattered Stonewall's windows during the uprising on June 28, 1969. She herself denying this legend. However, there's no denying that she was definitely a legendary activist for her time, and such a legend stands as a testimony to her influence in the LGBTQ movement. Marsha was an outspoken Black trans LGBTQ rights and AIDS activist. She was also a sex worker and a drag queen during the late 20th century. She embodied individuality, uniqueness, compassion, resilience, you name it. She was, like, really awesome.
Yeah.
All right, well, I don't know what year she moved to New York, but she moved to New York, where she adopted her name, Marsha P. Johnson. The P stands for Pay It No Mind, which I personally love, because it refers to her resilience, and, yeah. She joined the Gay Liberation Front in 1970 and later linked up with a close friend called Sylvia Ramirez, another woman of color, to create the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, or STAR for short, which was a gay, gender nonconforming... a gay, gender nonconforming, and transgender activist organization. The two also founded the Star House, the first shelter for gay and trans youth in 1972, providing food, clothing, housing, and advice to the kids who came through their doors. They were a visible presence at the liberation marches and pride rallies, fighting for the inclusion of trans people and drag queens in the movement, and battling the respectability politics of emerging gay mainstream. She was also, like, a pretty cool pop icon. Like, she was photographed by Andy Warhol in 1974 for his series on drag queens. And she was also a member of I don't know if I'm saying this right, but J. Kamashia's performance troupe Hot Peaches. She was also an organizer for ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. What else? She died July 6, 1992. Her body was found in the Hudson River and was initially ruled a suicide. Her friends suspected foul play, and the case was reopened in 2012.
So it's still open?
I'm not sure. I did not get the time to, like, look into that, but I thought that was really interesting.
That is really interesting. I did not know
that.
After Stonewall, there were a lot of things that started up. It really, like, lit a fire under everybody, and they wanted to fight back. And, I know gay men created the Gay Liberation Front, I think.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, Marsha was a part of that, too. It's cool to see how that all kind of links together. Yeah. I know with Laura, she was also part of the Grenwell community. What's it called? Grenwell?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. But I know she was a part of it, too. That's, at least in my research, it says that that's where she started exploring her, self-identity and sexuality through that area.
Yeah, so you said Marsha P. Johnson was part of the Gay Liberation Front?
Yes, she was.
Yeah, so the Gay Liberation Front was the first gay organization that actually used gay in the name.
Yeah.
There were other organizations, and that came after Stonewall. There were other organizations before that. The Society for Gay Men called Mattachine Society, and then the Society for Lesbians called the Daughters of Bilitis, I think, is how that's pronounced.
Bilitis?
Maybe.
What does that mean?
I have no idea. It's probably some kind of... it's probably a lesbian from mythology. I don't know.
Yeah, probably. I would not doubt it.
Lovers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those were things, but Gay Liberation Front was the first to be like really upfront with its name.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool.
I'm glad they were.
Mm-hmm.
I actually want to, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I know with Miss Lord, let me read this real quick. Apparently, like, for the 20th anniversary gathering for Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, and, you know, the whole Civil Rights March on Washington, D.C., the National Coalition for Black Lesbians and Gays were being refused to speak at the podium, which I thought was kind of ridiculous because, like, you're here for civil rights, yet you're doing onto others which has been done to you. But gladly, Coretta Scott King was there, and she allowed Lord to speak. In doing so, Audre said, "There's a war on classism, homophobia, ageism, racism, sexism. We need everyone to fight this war. You're not going to include us? Are we not black enough?" And in this act, like, I really feel like she became a very prominent voice for the underrepresented, you know. And I was going to connect that back to the whole gay thing, actually using the name. I feel like it's so important to, like, put it out there, not to hide it under the rug or anything like that. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree.
I was trying to, like, do you get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's important to, like, I mean, it's scary and it's dangerous, but we need the people who are like, look, we're here, we're not going away. Like, this is the thing.
And by naming it, like, literally Gay Liberation Front, it speaks it.
Yeah,
like,
and you can't ignore it.
Yeah.
You can't say they're just gal pals. Like, you can't do that anymore.
Which is so annoying.
They're just roommates.
They're just roommates, I swear, they're just
They've been roommates for 20 years.
It's fine.
It's like, what do you mean?
They're what? Yeah, and, like, Stonewall riots were basically what kind of started gay pride and pride parades and stuff because they used to be marches. So it just really started. It was a huge turning point. But it's also one of the only things. It's one of the only things I know about LGBT history. And it's one of the only things a lot of people know.
I know with me, like, the history I know is more modern, like 2005 and up. Right. You know, so
it's pretty true, but I mean, then you sort of have to, like, ask yourself why. And I feel like it almost happened that, like, there was this liberation movement, and then it almost got, like, swept under the rug. Like, it happened, cool, you guys did it. Now we just carry on doing what we were doing before.
Yeah, I totally see that.
It didn't really materialize into anything. It didn't. I mean, what actually came out of it? Because marriage equality only came much later, and is still now being debated.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I guess it's kind of like just all the civil rights movements that have happened. They happen, and everyone's like, "Yeah, that's great. It happened," and they help to stop really terrible things. And it's like, but like, terrible things are still happening. Those overshadow these great victories, and these huge turning points tend to overshadow the issues that are still there.
I feel like it's coming from the way that we look back at history. Because I know, for example, with the civil rights movement, that's what people consider to be the end of racism and things of that nature. And I think it could be the same for the LGBT movement as well. It's like looking back at that and thinking that's the end, like, lends itself to ignoring the problem further to that end. So it definitely, our perception of our own history definitely needs to change.
That's true. And I mean, when we look at history, we look at things, it's like, oh, that's terrible. I can't believe that used to happen. It's like, but it still happens. Still definitely
It's
happens.
like, I like to explain it, it's like, you know, back then it might have been a lot more overt in your face. There might have been legislation and stuff, and maybe that's gone. but people's attitudes haven't changed.
Right.
Yeah.
So it might not happen in the streets, but it's definitely happening around dinner tables, in homes, you know, so...
I know, the way I think about it, it feels like, yeah, it may not be as, like, out there, blatant, in your face, but it seems like it's become more systematic. Instead, something where it's hard to grasp, where it can easily hide.
Harder to prove.
Yeah.
Harder to hold people accountable. That's what I feel,
Yeah.
And also, like, you have all of, like, oppression manifests in so many different ways, and not everybody believes that what is oppression is oppression. Like, especially thinking about microaggressions.
Yeah.
Like, that's oppression, and those are dangerous. Stereotypes are dangerous, and, like, people like to say, oh, well, stereotypes are stereotypes for a reason. Like, that may be true.
Like, but that still doesn't mean
to
be, like, I'm sorry, I'm gonna curse, but that still doesn't mean be an asshole.
Right, yeah, no.
Stereotype.
Like, stereotypes might exist for some reason, but, like, are they true? They're not necessarily true. And, like, maybe because stereotypes existed, the way people treated people because of those stereotypes made them true in some ways. Like, there are words for that in science and, like, psychology about, like...
Yes, there are.
Like, what's the word? You can't prove that something is true. It's like in research.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yes.
I don't. I'm so confused.
Like in research. Okay, so when you're doing research and you want to say this causes this, like correlation does not equal causation.
Yeah,
right.
Right.
So like, so correlation doesn't equal causation, and that's something you hear all the time. But it's so true.
Yeah.
So like,
it's like you hear it, but nobody actually like processes.
Yeah.
It, like realizes that's a true statement.
Right. So to prove that something causes something else, you have to prove that the cause came before the result. If that makes sense. And there is a term for it, and I can't remember the term.
Oh man.
Whatever.
I wish I knew. That just reminded me of something. Oh yeah, in that other podcast I was listening to, it was talking about the power of language, the power of, basically it was saying language is a tool. What you call something, like what you said with those stereotypes, really do have effects in our lives. It was talking about how important it is to name yourself, to give yourself, like, if there is not a word for what you are, it doesn't exist, then you need to go ahead and make that word for yourself. Go ahead and make that history and blaze that path, because like there's so many people who will do it for you, and not in a very favorable light.
That's true. Yeah, because a lot of people say, I don't like labels, and like that's fine and everything, but you can't escape labels.
Yeah, it's like,
because people are going to give them to you.
Yeah, so it's like either you make that for yourself or let other people, Yeah.
Which also kind of sucks, because it's like you shouldn't be responsible for making sure people aren't assholes to you. Like you shouldn't, but
unfortunately, that isn't the world we live in today. So we kind of have to act within the constraints that we're in, like, right now. Hopefully that'll change, though.
Hopefully.
I know some of my more modern favorites are Janet Mock and Livering Cops.
Janet Mock, and Janet Mock came here. Did you see her speak here?
I think I did. Was this 2 years ago? And I know one of my other favorite bloggers, she's trans as well. Her name's Kat Black, if anybody wants to look her up. She's on Facebook.
I didn't know she was trans.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen her everywhere. I didn't know she was trans.
Didn't know either, but like, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, her transition. I just looked it up.
Oh.
Yeah, she makes amazing videos talking about all these topics. So if anybody wants to check that out, I feel like it'd be a good introduction to stuff like this.
Yeah.
Of the American gay liberation movement, my knowledge is limited to what I've seen on movies and series. I haven't heard anything else beyond that. You guys were talking about the limited information you even get in, like, at university and stuff, and the classes. I think for us as well, the only thing I've ever heard of is the English department in third year if you do English lit, you can do queer literature as a option, as an elective.
All your favorite classical lit people were queer.
Yeah.
All of them.
Yeah.
All of them. Anyway.
Yeah. So it's also pretty limited there. But recently, though, there's been sort of a change because there's been sort of this movement towards intersectionality, and a lot of sort of the student organizations have changed their names of their organizations because they said it's exclusionary. Yeah. So, I mean, the one at my institute, it still gets a lot of like flack basically for not being inclusive, but when I was involved there, any time we tried to, let's say, have a meeting about changing the name and we would get together with the community, everyone would leave going, it's okay, we just leave the name. And then like, okay, then we just leave the name. But
it's like a problem with no solution.
Yeah, exactly. But I know, for example, at the Rhodes University, their queer society has changed their name to the Simon and Corley student organization. And Simon and Corley is one of the like most revered icons in South Africa in terms of the like queer movement. And so what's difficult about the South African context in that way is because of apartheid. That movement, that kind of overshadowed anything else that was going on. So there isn't even that much research done into, okay, but what was the gay liberation movement in South Africa? Where did it come from? Anyway, so Simon and Corley, he was quite young. Well, he was 18 when he came out, and his mother tried to send him to therapy and to doctors and stuff, you know, to fix him. And eventually, after many years of this being unsuccessful, she sort of allowed him to move in with his boyfriend.
Sorry. So sorry about that. You can continue.
He was also obviously very involved with any sort of anti-apartheid movement. I read that he was part of the UDF, which is the United Democratic Front, and fighting obviously the oppression against black people in South Africa and against apartheid. And he was in the 1970s, he was part of the student uprisings, and he was arrested on many occasions for that. But it's not that there wasn't anything else happening in South Africa in terms of a gay movement. So there was an organization called the Gay Association of South Africa, and Simon and Corley talks about how he was really disappointed because he sort of reached out to this community and they basically were like, no, like, you can't be a part of us. So for example, they only held their events in whites only facilities. So that means no person of color could join them, or no person classified as you know, non-white as they were back then could join them. So I think that was a very specific, exclusionary, very racist practice that they had. And this obviously prompted him to sort of say, okay, but now we need to then work within our own community and sort of start our own movement. And after, you know, sort of coming out to his comrades and talking to his comrades at the UDF, they all sort of said, okay, well, homophobia is also oppression, so we need to make this part of our goal as well.
That's really cool.
I'm glad he did that.
So I mean, and that's quite incredible because I mean, we still have nowadays in South Africa, it's a discussion as to which community almost has it worse. Where's homophobia worse in South Africa? You know, is it the more white conservatives, or is it the more, you know, black traditional families? Like, who has it worse? And obviously you can't say that. I don't think anyone you can't answer that question.
I mean, really, it's like a question that almost doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. The fact that it's still there, it's there.
Because like when you take into consideration intersectionality, like where one person has an advantage, they have a disadvantage somewhere else. Like it's just too complicated to really
like
say overall, I would think.
It's always seemed to be a way to avoid actually addressing the root of the problem.
Yeah.
Because, like, I don't even have a good example, but I think you know what I mean.
Exactly. And anyway, so he was charged with treason because he was fighting the apartheid system at that time. Nelson Mandela was also charged with treason.
Yeah.
So he did go to prison, but he was released after a while, obviously, and co-founded the gay and lesbian organization of Witwatersrand. Now, Witwatersrand is a area, it's a place in South Africa, close to Pretoria, Johannesburg, and this was the first national black organization in South Africa, queer black organization in South Africa. But after 1994, so after the vote and everything, he worked closely with Nelson Mandela to get the ruling party, the ANC, their support for gay rights. And in 1996, when the South African Constitution was drafted, South Africa became the first nation to include sexual orientation protection in its constitution.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is cool to know.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
Also, I love the name GLOW for an organization, especially like a gay organization.
Yeah.
I think that's incredible.
It's like this
Awesome.
flourish.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean that's pretty cool. But I also, like I said, I don't have too much knowledge about it, but I know that it was put into the Constitution, but there was still weird legislation. Like there was legislation against sodomy, and I don't know, all sorts of things that only actually left that only got resolved like 2005, 2006.
Wow, so only like recently.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think, and marriage equality was introduced in South Africa before, I can tell you that much, but it's a roundabout thing.
Wasn't it everywhere?
So, but there's also debate around that because it's not actually a marriage, it's just a civil union, but people treat it as a marriage, and they don't actually realize that there's still a difference. And unfortunately he died in 1998 from AIDS-related complications, which is obviously a whole nother layer to everything going on in South Africa.
With the sodomy legislation, was that something that was like enforced, or it was just like an antiquated legislation that was just there still?
I think it was antiquated, but from what I heard, it was pretty difficult to get it out of the legislation. And this is just from discussions and stuff that I've attended, but it was strange that it was still around and it took that long to get it out.
Because I think there's still like a Georgia law against sodomy, but like there are also a bunch of other Georgia laws that like no one follows. There's some ridiculous laws out there that like aren't even enforced, like they might as well not even be a law.
Oh yeah, I believe that.
So one of the things, I mean, I spoke about how there was, same-sex or sexual orientation protection in the Constitution in South Africa, but also the age of consent was 19 for homosexual acts, but only 16 for heterosexual acts. And this was rectified in 2007.
Is this South Africa?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so this is still in place there.
Well, no, it was changed in 2007. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I misunderstood. Okay.
So then it was, again, just 16. 16 is the age of consent. All over. So, I mean, it's interesting to see how, constitutions are one thing, but legislation is another.
Yeah.
But yeah.